Hey, good morning. Welcome to this Sunday edition of The Sweat. Steve Buchanan alongside Josh Applebaum, Julian Edlow. If you are here for anything other than football, I got some bad news for you. You're not going to get it here on this Sunday morning. We have a lot to get to here, all going to be football. Let's talk about what we have coming up here on the show on this Week 2 Sunday edition. We're starting off with life without Aaron Rodgers. That begins in New York, although some reports are saying he wants to come back for the playoffs. We'll talk about that in a little while. We're going to corner the market. Josh and I are going to talk about some cornerbacks to pick on for Week 2, and then we're going to talk about some lessons learned. What did Week 1 teach us ahead of today's games, and we'll apply that to some bets here in Week 2. But we are going to be starting off with some of our Week 1 best bets. What are we going to be targeting here in Week 2? A lot of injuries that are coming up for this week as well. You see Austin Eckler, Jacoby Myers are going to be out, but let's talk about the Chiefs and Jaguars and what are the most notable injuries from last week, looking like he's going to play here in Week 2. Travis Kelce expected to be back on the field here. Chris Jones should also be back for the Chiefs as well, while Clyde Edwards-Helaire looking like he's questionable with an illness. So let's talk about some best bets for this game here, gentlemen. We got the Jags and the Chiefs. I am going to start off here. I like the Jags plus 3.5. I think the Jags are going to be covering in this game here. Jaguars 5-0 last year as a home underdog, covering by almost 11 points. It was a spot that they excelled in all season long. Then, of course, we have Travis Kelce back, so obviously Patrick Mahomes will have his guy that he can throw to all throughout this game. But from what we saw in Week 1, he just wasn't gelling with any of his other receivers in that game last week, and that might have been one of their biggest downfalls, I think, is that he just wasn't on that same page with any of those guys, whereas Trevor Lawrence was hitting all of his guys, especially Calvin Ridley. You have Zay Jones in the mix, Christian Kirk, who wasn't a big factor here, but I like the Jags plus 3.5. It's one of my best bets for this game here for the Chiefs. Julian, where are you going to be going for this one?
Yeah, I played before the Chris Jones news, played the 2.5, laid the 2.5 with the Chiefs early in the week. I put it out in my best bets article at 3, obviously going to 3.5. Big move on key numbers there. I would go with the Chiefs or pass at 3.5 or buy yourself the half point or watch for it to pop back up. There's minus 115s, minus 120s on the 3 rather than lay the 3.5. But you mentioned what the Jags do as home dogs. Well, what they haven't done as home dogs is play a winless Chiefs team that's off a terrible loss on a long week. They're coming in hungry for this one. They're getting their second and third best players in Travis Kelce and Chris Jones back in the mix. So as much as I respect Jacksonville at home, this is a tough spot where, you know, the Super Bowl champs are coming in and do not want to start 0-2. I think this is a Kansas City spot. I think the pass rush will get to Lawrence with Jones back. And I think that the Chiefs offense, you mentioned, obviously, things kind of fell apart without Kelce. When you put that security blanket back in the mix, the red zone threat back in the mix, I think that'll open everything else up for them.
Josh, what do you think?
I'm going with you on this one, Steve.
Let's
I'm
go,
going
baby.
Jags plus 3.5 in this one. A couple reasons to like the Jaguars. I think number one, Julian mentioned it. Someone told me a long time ago, someone I respect always said, favorites early, dogs late. So Julian got the minus 2.5 on the road with the Chiefs. You can get a 3.5 right now. Steve, that sounds like a middle to me. This game lands on 3 if you had both sides of it. But in terms of playing the number that we're at right now, I like the Jags and the points here. This game opened, minus 2.5 Kansas City. They're a big public play, getting around 70% of bets. I think the obvious, thought process here is, hey, they didn't look good in Week 1. They're getting Jones back. They're getting Kelce back. They're going to roll and get back on track here. But when this game opened 2.5, it got to 3, then it got to 3.5, and there's a lot of buyback on the plus 3.5 right now, looking like it may get back down to 3. So I'm grabbing the hook right now, Steve. Jags are contrarian in a heavily bet game. You look at these conference dogs getting 6 points or less, kind of that short dog system match. That's 64% ATS this year, 60% since 2019. And also, you look at Mahomes. He doesn't cover a ton as a favorite. Great player, but he's only 46% ATS. Yep. So I'll take the 3.5 with the Jags at home.
Horrible as favorites, horrible as double-digit favorites as well. That was a sore spot for them last year against the spread. All right, Raiders at Bills. Obviously, this looks like a great bounce-back spot for Josh Allen and the Bills after a really bad showing against the Jets earlier in the week here. Big news in this one here, Jacoby Myers obviously out for the Raiders. Doesn't sound like it would be a big injury, but that was the guy that Jimmy Garoppolo was going towards in that game. So this feels like a great spot here for Devontae Adams. So I'm going to be taking the over on his receptions. This has been bouncing around between 5.5 and 6.5. I think he clears either number here. I mean, he should easily be seeing double-digit targets in this game without Jacoby Myers. Myers had 10 last week, where Adams only had 9 in that one, but no other receiver on the Raiders last week had more than 1 target. Josh Jacobs had 3, but all the targets went to Myers, Adams, and Josh Jacobs. So you take Jacoby Myers out of the mix there, and this should be a good matchup for Adams. He should draw Tre'Davious White in coverage, and while he's been stingy with that reception rate, he did allow over 12 yards per reception last year. So I like Davante Adams to go over his reception total. Josh, where are you going to go on this one?
I'm going Raiders plus 8.5 here. Some books are down to 8, so again, make sure you can get the hook on this one. But what really jumped out to me, Steve, is public split 50-50 down the middle. You know, part of the public says, hey, it's a get-right spot for the Bills. Other part of the public says, I don't really want to lay big points with Josh Allen after he threw all those interceptions on primetime. But 50-50, theoretically, a line shouldn't move. Yet this line's dropping to Vegas, even though Jacoby Myers is out. This game opened as high as -9.5. It's down to 8.5. Some shops are down to 8. Jimmy G, he's 18-5 ATS as a dog. He's 20-10 ATS on the road. I took the 8.5 here. I'm going Raiders in the points.
I can't stand Jimmy G. Julian, where are you at?
Raiders showed a little something in week 1, obviously, but I can't go there on another road game going out east. And Myers, he's the guy that was scoring the touchdowns, getting those receptions, opening up Adams. I can't trust the Raiders. It's a lot to lay with a Bills team that's on a short week and looked poor, though. I think Buffalo's the perfect teaser leg right now. They're at 8.5. 6 points gets you down to 2.5. Gets you through every key number. So Buffalo's the perfect teaser leg in the early window, and you got some things in the late window or primetime games that you can put them with.
All right, let's pick up the pace here a little bit here. Seahawks at Lions. I like the Seahawks plus 4.5. A little bit worried about this because I think the Lions O-line against the Seahawks defensive line is going to be something that's going to be a big concern here, but the Lions are such a public favorite here. It felt like everything fell their way against the Chiefs in week 1. That's not going to happen every single time. I think the Seahawks are in a decent bounce back spot here this week. What do you think, Julian?
Yeah, not much to add. The Lions are a team that everybody loves. They're public. Seahawks could not have looked worse, particularly in the second half against the Rams. The look-ahead line, much shorter, inside a field goal. Now you're getting more points with a Seahawks team that has a lot to prove. I haven't bet the game, but this is Seahawks or pass for me.
Josh?
Right there with you. Again, we saw this as a complete buy low, sell high. Lions look great. Seahawks look terrible. That's a great way to kind of go against the grain and take Seattle. Seattle was plus 5.5. Now they're down to 4.5. Lions moving in their direction. And Pete Carroll in his career, Steve, he's 60% against the spread as a dog. I'll go with the points there in Seattle.
Ravens at Bengals. This feels like such a great spot for the Bengals to get back on track here. Mark Andrews will be back for the Ravens, of course, here, but felt like Joe Burrow was kind of really feeling the effects of missing all of camp and preseason there. Defensively, Baltimore is not on the same level as Cleveland here. I think this is a week where the Bengals get back on track, cover that -3. I feel like if they had a good game last week, we're looking at a higher number here, so I feel like -3 is actually a nice number here to get the Bengals. What do you think, Julian?
Yeah, strong lean to the Bengals here, particularly at 3. This should be a get-right spot for them. However, I actually played under 46.5 early in the week here. You see it at 46 now. I'm fine with under 46. These teams played 3 times last year if you include the playoff game. Those scores, 19-17 Ravens, 27-16 Bengals, 24-17 Bengals. They all stayed well under this number, and I think in an early season divisional matchup, Burrow dinged up, Lamar Jackson, no real explosive plays last week. I would go with the under in this game.
What do you think, Josh?
Well, number one, outdoor divisional unders. That's been great last few seasons. Since 2021, it's 61% to the under. Now, I'm going to go Baltimore here with the hook, the 3.5. Again, if you look at our board right now, it's like +3 at even money. I don't love buying points, but I do think there's a case to be made around a key number. If you can get Baltimore, up to 3.5 at like -120, that's my bet. I don't think it's that sharp. I'm wary of a buy low spot on the Bengals. But Steve, here's what's got me going with the Ravens today.
Let's hear it.
Harbaugh as a dog in his career, 59% against the spread. Lamar Jackson as a dog in his career, 10-1 ATS against the spread.
Oh, nice.
You give me a 3.5 in a divisional game. Maybe it's a 3-point win by Cincy. I'm going to take Harbaugh and Jackson in the points.
Chargers at Titans. Austin Eckler is out of this game. Joey Bosa, questionable, but most likely playing in this one. DeAndre Hopkins didn't practice all week, but he is looking like he is going to play. Give me Justin Herbert to go over 286.5 passing yards in this game. Titans are a pass funnel defense, and that was on full display last week. Derek Carr went for over 300 yards last week and over 9 yards per pass attempt in that game. Chargers ran the ball 36 times last week. That's how you try to beat Miami. That is not how you're going to try and beat the Titans. here. You're going to pass in this one. So I think Herbert over 286.5 is the play in this one. What do you think, Josh?
I'm going to go Titans +3. Make sure you get the 3.
Yeah.
Again, shop around. I'm a big dog and under guy, Steve. What can I say? This was -3 Chargers pretty much all week. It's getting down to 2.5. Tells me money here is coming in on Tennessee. Big part of that is Austin Eckler being out. But we're just talking about, coaches and quarterbacks. ATS, Vrabel against the spread as a dog, 62% against the spread. Also 2 winless teams facing off in week 2. It's a big sample size over the last 20 years. Take that dog, 65% against the spread. Make sure you get the key number of 3, though, with Tennessee.
Julian's going to be on the Chargers.
Yeah, I have no feel for a side in this game, honestly. I would maybe lean to Josh's side, Tennessee as a home dog, but I think what Steve's saying, Tennessee stops the run. Eckler's out. Kelly's done really poor when Eckler's out, so they're going to throw. So I'm with Steve. I think it's Herbert passing yards if I'm playing anything in this game.
So we will we'll skip the Bears and the Bucks. We'll get to that later on into the show here, but we got to take a quick break here. So what's going on in New York? Robert Saleh is saying this is Zach Wilson's team. New York is hoping that he's lying. We don't want him under center. But how will the second-year quarterback fare against a tough Dallas defense? We'll discuss that and more next on The Sweat.
has been front and center in everything. Aaron Rodgers is the best player the Jets have ever had.
I feel like it's been pretty positive. There's been a lot of good energy around the facility. Every day there's been something that's a little special sign or synchronicity or just a cool moment that reminds me I'm in the right place.
Down goes Rodgers in the sack for Leonard Floyd. He's coming out of the game.
It's not good.
I mean, that literally looks like a drama, like a horror movie when you watch that montage there.
It was
from
for
New
Jets
York.
fans.
It really was there. But you see this picture here. So the news that came out is that Rodgers got a new innovative surgery and could return for the playoffs. But of course, that would entail for the Jets to even get there to begin with. So can they even get there at this point? I mean, the Jets to make the playoffs were at -130. They're now 215 after the injury. Now, to be fair, I mean, there are a lot of new surgeries out there that players can come back. I'm actually friends with some wrestlers on All Elite Wrestling. One of them had a torn labrum, got some stem cells, and was back in a couple of months. So there are some ways that some of these guys can come back. But is it even realistic to think that the Jets can make the playoffs without even Rodgers to begin with, Julian?
Well, Steve's friends with some wrestlers, so
That's right.
apparently Aaron Rodgers is playing in the playoffs, and they're going to win the Super Bowl.
I'm just giving
No,
examples.
I have a big issue with this. This is not a cartoon. This is the NFL. This dude's almost 40 years old, whatever his age is, has a ruptured Achilles that we saw explode on national TV. Kobe Bryant did this at an old age. Aaron Rodgers made reference to, channeling his inner Kobe. Kobe was 8-9 months to come back. Kevin Durant, when he did this notably, publicly, in the NBA Finals when he came back early from a calf injury, which is interesting because Aaron Rodgers had a calf injury in camp. Durant rushed back from a calf injury over a calendar year before we saw him on an NBA floor again. The NFL playoffs start in 4 months. 4 months.
Yeah.
I don't care what remedies you have, and this is a full tear. This is not partial like Cam Akers, who is 15 years younger, as you noted, Steve, that made a quick recovery. This can't happen. It's full rupture. The players don't play 4 months later from this. If he does, I'm not wishing this upon him, but something bad will probably happen to him. I will put it on the board. Yes, no. Will Aaron Rodgers play again this season? No. Hard no.
Josh, forgive me. I know Julian and I were on the Jets to not make the playoffs. What was your stance on them before the Rodgers injury?
Before the Rodgers injury, I mean, I was kind of high on this Jets team.
Okay.
They have a great defense. Obviously, Rodgers, almost like Brady, when, Garoppolo was drafted, that lit a fire under Brady. He goes to Tampa Bay, obviously, and has wins a Super Bowl there. So I kind of thought that Rodgers maybe needed that motivation. Obviously, everything changes now with Zach Wilson taking over. My question is, do they try to bring back, Phillip Rivers? I've heard a lot about Matt Ryan.
Oh, God, no. Good Lord.
Do you make a trade for Cooper Rush? I
Here's
don't know.
the fun part. What if could Zach Wilson get him there? Probably not. What happens if you bring in a Phillip Rivers and he is good enough to get you to the playoffs, and then you're going to say, we're going to give it to Aaron Rodgers, who tore his Achilles 4 months ago, which is impossible, but I'm just saying in theory.
A lot would need to happen if they bring in Phillip Rivers and then they actually do make the playoffs here.
Yeah, and then you take his job away from him. I would love to watch it. It sounds like a TV show.
I mean, one thing that did change for sure is that with the Aaron Rodgers injury, all the lines, futures lines for this week, changed dramatically. So this week, especially against the Cowboys, this spread was at 3.5. It's gone to 8.5 after that injury. Let's see what it's at right now. I think it's at 9 at this point, if I last checked here.
So.
Yes, it is at 9 right now. The total, which took one of the most dramatic drops, 46.5 to 40.5, and now it's at 38.5. Is anything even playable at this point here?
So, great question, Steve. To me, I think it screams under, but I wonder if the line has moved too much because
that feels too much, right?
Is it a buy low opportunity at this point, Steve? I mean, it opened 47-ish, down to now all the way to like 38. It bottomed out, but now it's starting to get back up to 38.5. So my question to be at this point would be, hey, do you buy low, take the over? That's my one kind of angle on this game.
Julian, what do you think?
I played the under at 39. I still think it's a good play. We are where we are. We're not getting the best of the number, but Zach Wilson going up against this defense that pitched a shutout on the road on Sunday Night Football, and the Jets defense looked fantastic against the Bills, and Dallas is coming off a near-perfect game. I think they're going to force Dak Prescott into some mistakes and make him look human again. So between the way these two defenses play and what they have on offense, I still think there's value here in the under, particularly with some of the mistakes we're going to see, particularly with some of the running game that we should see both of these teams try and get going.
And then we'll talk about this last year, then we'll start talking about Zach Wilson specifically. But are there any futures you think have changed without Aaron Rodgers under center here? I know yesterday we talked a little about the win total going down from 9.5 to 8.5. Is there anything that's still playable there, do you think, Josh?
I think it's the Patriots. I mean, we mentioned this yesterday, but
sometimes for me.
When you look at win totals and futures bets, it's not just that you're betting on something. It's kind of the trickle-down effect of maybe I'm not betting on that team, but maybe it benefits another team here. And I think the beneficiary is the Patriots. Their win total was 7.5 going into the season, got down to 6.5. Pros really did like, wise guys like that under 7.5. But now it's a buy low spot. Over 6.5 at DraftKings is minus 140. You're going to have to pay that price, but I think for a reason. Belichick obviously has the hatred and the history of the Jets. They're going to get up for these games and going up against Zach Wilson. I think that Pats defense is salivating right now. So I think you play the Pats over 6.5 wins.
Julian, looking at the AFC East, this almost obviously clears the path for either the Bills or the Dolphins to take this one here. Dolphins are the favorites right now, but obviously a win here today would really kind of propel them. Is there any team that you like now more that the Jets are kind of basically out of it at this point?
Not division-wise, because I think that price, swap at the top with how cheap Miami is now compared to Buffalo. If anything, maybe you're buying Buffalo low now. But the division's still a little dicey to me. It just knocks, if you did like the Jets, who I didn't like, out of the mix firmly. But I'm with Josh. My initial reaction here was the Patriots, who now get two very winnable games against the Jets that were supposed to be much more difficult. And if you like it, I would bet it today because they're getting the sharp money on Sunday Night Football against the Dolphins. If the Patriots wind up coming out of this Eagles and Dolphins stretch as home dogs back-to-back, 1-1, that game with the look-ahead line -2 at the Jets next week, that's probably going to cross a field goal if the Pats beat Miami. And you're looking at a potential 2-1 start with an over 6.5 and a home game against the Jets still to come where you'll be big favorites. Now's the time. We'll find out what happens tonight, but now's the time if you like the Patriots to get involved.
So Coach Robert Saleh said that this is now Zach Wilson's team. Now, he should be saying that because you're not going to say, oh, we're going to go get somebody else and just totally ruin the lack of confidence he had already. So this is kind of a two-part question here. Is this actually going to be Zach Wilson's team? And if that is the case, who is that going to impact the most? Obviously, Garrett Wilson's going to come up a lot here, but do you think that's the guy, Julian?
Probably. When you look at the rest of the names that are out there, there's nobody that is really a game changer for you. And if you do that, then what does the dynamic become? Now Zach Wilson's definitely done in New York, whereas everything that you're reading, Aaron Rodgers is talking to him, trying to make him the protege, try and help him out this year, which, that type of coaching from a Hall of Fame quarterback could help. I just don't see a better option. As much as I'm not a Zach Wilson guy, and I'm not, I don't see the better option. And then like we talked about earlier in the segment, like what happens if you bring in a Phillip Rivers and he actually is good enough to get you to the playoffs and then Aaron Rodgers comes back? Now your quarterback room is pretty dicey. So I think that you ride Wilson and see where he gets you. And, it did almost get him to the playoffs last season as poor as Wilson played.
Who do you think this kind of affects here? Because we obviously talk about Wilson. One person I thought about too, Randall Cobb, basically brought in because that was Aaron Rodgers' guy.
Lazard.
Without that too, Lazard too. Like these are all guys that were for Rodgers essentially. So Wilson's the obvious answer. Is there somebody else that you think this could affect a lot as well?
I would say negatively, maybe the running game here because you love Breece Hall, you love Dalvin Cook, but they're only as good as the passing game. I mean, if this is a situation where all these defenses load up on the run game and they say, Zach Wilson, come beat us, we'll go, man coverage one-on-one, you can load the box and maybe stop some of these running backs. So I think if you're a running back, no matter who you are in this team, you're disappointed it's now flipped from Rodgers to Zach Wilson. But I would look at Zach Wilson in a prop today. It's a little pricey, guys, but will he throw one interception?
Yes.
I haven't seen a juiced up over like this in a long time. The over a half pick, so just throw one pick, is over -215.
Oh my God.
That is so expensive. Again, it's a big price here, but it just tells you, maybe does he throw a pick? Obviously, odds makers are expecting him to.
And let's kind of expand this a little bit here too. So what does this injury do for other teams' futures? We hit on the AFC East, but does this also open up the window for another team in the AFC to make the playoffs? Let's say the Jets made the wild card instead. Now that might not be the case. So is there another team in the AFC that could potentially get in now because you're not worrying so much about the Jets?
I mean, so you and I didn't believe in the Jets, Steve, initially, and we liked the plus price on them to miss the postseason, which that ship has sailed, but that would have been a great bet. That was probably the time to pick whoever you wanted to slip in over them. Now the rest of the board is adjusted to the Jets being out, over $2 that the Jets missed the playoffs. So I don't think it's necessarily appropriately priced now, but it is something to monitor, or it is appropriately priced now, which leaves no value now, is what I'm trying to say. It is something to monitor throughout the season, where if the Jets get into the bye week 3-3, which would require wins over the Patriots and Broncos if they lose to the heavy hitters, then you reevaluate.
Josh, any thoughts?
I look at some yes/no to make the playoff props right now, because you're thinking the Jets, either maybe they'd win the AFC East or they'd get a wild card spot. Well, now you're expecting them to, obviously based on the odds we just looked at a minute ago, to not make the postseason. So will that open the door to maybe like the Steelers or, the Jaguars? I like them to win that division. But again, yes/no props. I think one of these teams sneak in with the Jets falling.
All right, good segment, guys. We're going to take another quick break here on the Sweat. San Francisco looked pretty good in week 1. Oh, boy. Are we already prepared to declare the 49ers the best team in the NFL? We'll dive into the 4 p.m. slate next here on The Sweat. Welcome back to the Sweat. Steve Buchanan, Josh Applebaum, Julian Edlow. We're going to get to the rest of today's slate in the NFL, the late game window for the afternoon game. Starting off with my personal favorite game of this slate. It's going to be a little underdog.
It's both of your personal favorite games on this slate.
A little underdog action here. I like the Packers. I really do like them on the money line here this afternoon. I thought Jordan Love, while he wasn't overly accurate, he completed 15 of his 27 pass attempts, 245 yards and 9.1 yards per attempt. His average distance of target was at 10.6. A couple receivers did have drops in that game, but there is nothing defensively that worries you when it comes to the Falcons. They don't really have a pass rush. They have a terrible secondary. Don't let anything get confused that only because Bryce Young was held to 146 yards on 38 pass attempts that they have a good secondary. That was more on Bryce Young than anything. So I think this is going to be an opportunity for the Packers to come out here. I know they got some injuries with Watson and Jones, but I still think the rest of the receivers for the Packers can get it done here this afternoon. But Packers on the money line. That's one of my favorite bets on the slate. You have the other side here.
I do, and I think this is one of the best parts of our show, guys, the Sweat. Steve gave you a great cap right there to take the Packers. I'm going to give you the other side on why you should take the Atlanta Falcons.
But
it's up to you.
And I'm going to tell you why I'm not betting the game.
What you want to do here. So I like Atlanta in this spot for a couple reasons. Number one, Packers are very public. They're getting around 70% of bets. This line is really moving toward Atlanta over the last 24, 48 hours. I mean, this line's been all over the place. It opened, actually, the look ahead was Atlanta, like laying 1.5. Early this week, it flipped with to the Packers minus 1.5. But over the last 2 days or so, it's flipped all the way back to Atlanta. They were minus 1.5, minus 2 yesterday. This morning, I'm seeing them go maybe up to minus 2.5. So line continues to go to the Falcons. They're really contrarian play. They're only getting around 25% of bets, but almost half the money. And this is like a fade the trendy dog play for me, Steve. You got public love for Green Bay, yet the line's going to Atlanta. You mentioned a couple injuries with Green Bay to some of their offensive players. So I'm going money line here on Atlanta, minus 130. I like the fact that public's Packers, yet line's going to the Falcons.
Tell us why you want nothing to do with this game.
Yeah, you're both
Be the
correct.
tiebreaker. Come on, give me a lead.
You're both
at least.
correct. My head says I like what I saw from the Packers in week 1, but I also think as a Bears under 7.5 better, I'm not buying the Bears side this year. I don't think they're good. Now, Atlanta got the week 1 win at home. They looked good. I made Panthers under 7.5 better this year. I don't believe in them in the rookie quarterback in week 1. That's a game they should have won. So I think both teams should have looked good in week 1, and they did. I don't like that the Packers are on the road once again. The Falcons are playing a second home game. I think if you made me pick which team is better, I think the Packers are a better team than the Falcons.
Yes.
But the Falcons are in a better spot than the Packers this week. I still have to learn what both of these teams are because in my opinion, they both beat teams that I bet win total unders on and won games they should have. I have no idea which team is better in this spot in week 2.
All right, Colts at Texans. I really don't have a strong lead in this game here. It's basically a pick 'em at this point. Zach Moss will be back, so there's obviously a boost there for the Colts who had nothing from their run game in week 1. CJ Stroud was limited in practice on Friday with a shoulder injury. They're saying that he is going to play today, so that's good. So I took this a different approach. I actually made a little same game parlay here.
Whoa.
Richardson and Stroud to both throw an interception at plus 205.
Kind of like
So
it.
that's kind of where I'm going for this game.
Might as
here.
well toss Zach Wilson in there, too.
Right, but C.J. Stroud, 44 pass attempts in week 1. Didn't throw a pick in that one. Richardson did throw a pick on his 37 pass attempts. If they're going to be going back and forth here in this game, I just feel like this could be a bit of a sloppy game here, so want nothing to do with it. Julian, any thoughts on this game at all here?
Yeah, I'm going to go with another weird player prop, I guess. We're looking at Robert Woods here, the old wily vet. He was targeted 10 times by C.J. Stroud in Baltimore last week. He caught 6 of them for 57 yards. You can get Robert Woods at minus 105 to go over 3.5 receptions. You can get an over 33.5 receiving yards. Both very modest numbers against a Colts team that's not going to scare you away. They just let Zay Jones cash his overs. They just let Calvin Ridley cash his overs. I think Robert Woods is in a good spot in this game.
I'm kind of with you, Steve. I want nothing to do with this game. I think when you're betting the NFL slate, there are games that you focus on that you want to bet on, and there are games that you want to eliminate and just have nothing to do with. To me, it's a divisional game. Indy would have some value as a divisional dog, but yet Indy's getting like 70% of bets. They're the big public play. obviously with the spread, 2 rookie quarterbacks, it's probably going to be a tight game. Maybe you look to tease Indy up to, +7, 7.5 if you can get it. But really, this is a game that I want nothing to do with.
Niners at Rams, again, a game that I'm not overly excited about, but I am excited about taking the Rams under 18.5 points. They are not going to put up the same type of numbers that they did last week when they hung 30 against the Seahawks there. That Niners defensive line against the Rams offensive line is going to be one of the biggest mismatches on this day. Last week, Stafford was only under pressure on 9 of his 39 dropbacks. He might be under pressure on 9 of his dropbacks in the first, series for this game here. That Niners defensive line made the Steelers offensive line look like Swiss cheese last week. Pickett was under pressure on 46% of his 52 dropbacks. Niners are going to be all in Stafford's face this afternoon. He's not going to be able to get anything going, and neither is the run game because the 49ers can defend against the run. So give me the Rams under 18.5. Josh, what do you think about this one?
I'm going to lean pretty hard to the Rams here. I'm actually kind of considering maybe playing them. I know it's disgusting, but there has been some buyback here. This was Rams getting 7.5. A lot of these books are getting down to 7. On our DraftKings board right now, you're seeing that 7.5 with the Rams really juiced up. So if you do like the Rams, you want that hook right now if they end up losing by 7. Again, I may be undervaluing or underrating the 49ers. I like the Steelers in the week 1, and they absolutely got crushed there. So maybe the San Francisco 49ers are just so good that they'll roll in this spot. But there's been resistance. The line's starting to fall a little bit back. Divisional dogs last 3 years are 57% against the spread. So again, to me, it's a hold your nose. They're only getting 30% bets. Take the 7.5, or you just don't touch this one at all.
Julian.
This is where, so we're talking about teams like the Seahawks, buy low spots. This is back to reality for the Rams. This is a team that I thought could be almost as bad as the Arizona Cardinals preseason. They looked very good against the Seahawks. If it's 7, I'm laying it with the Niners. If it's higher, I'm using it as a teaser piece. You can put it with the Bills. You can put it with one of the 2.5-point dogs that there's many of on this slate. The Niners are freight train this year. I think this is going to be a Niners crowd in LA still. I think that you lay it with the Niners at 7 or better, and if it's above 7, that's when you use it as a teaser leg. Akers under 31.5 rushing yards on the Rams side. I think that this is going to be whatever we saw from the Rams in the second half in Seattle last week. I believe we're going to see the exact opposite of that this week.
No, I think that's totally fair too. Giants at Cardinals. Talked about this yesterday. There wasn't a team that had a worse week in week 1 than the Giants. So now they have a tremendous bounce back spot here against the Cardinals. I'm not crazy about taking a side on this one, although obviously I would lean the Giants at this point. But this is an excellent spot for Saquon Barkley, and I like going over his rushing yards of 71.5. The Cardinals cannot defend against the run at all. While there wasn't a great showing for the Commanders last week on the ground, who had 92 yards on 26 rush attempts in total, the Giants are a completely different team when it comes to the run here. Barkley was basically scripted out of that game last week against the Cowboys, only took 12 attempts, but he did look good on those rushing attempts, 4.3 yards per carry on those limited amount of carries. So give me Barkley to go over 71.5 rushing yards in a game that I think the Giants should handle, but again, I didn't think they could shut out last week as well. But Julian, where are you at here with Giants and Cardinals?
Yeah, I'm going to erase my mind of what we saw in week 1 from both teams and go back to my preseason stance here that the Arizona Cardinals are going to be one of the worst teams in the NFL in the last 20 years, compete with the winless Browns, the winless Lions teams. Did they look better than that in week 1? Yes. They were playing at the Commanders. The Commanders are nothing special here, and Sam Howell had some turnovers that was trying to gift the game to Arizona, and they still could not take it. The Giants are not a great team. I don't think they're going to necessarily make the playoffs, but they are angry about being embarrassed 40-0 at home on primetime. I'm going to clear my mind here. If I'm playing the game, it's Giants laying the points or pass. I think that this, if the Giants lost by 20 in week 1 and Arizona just didn't get those turnovers, that forced fumble that went to the end zone, this could be more like a 6.5, which it touched 6 at times. I think you can make the argument we're getting a discount on the Giants here, even as a road favorite that hasn't scored a point this season.
Are you going to surprise with another gross team, or are you going to back the Giants in this
Steve,
one?
you know me. We've been doing this for 2 years at this point. I'm going Cardinals in this one, guys. It's disgusting. It's the epitome of just being a play that
This
looks
one's
so
too
awful.
disgusting.
But this is why I like it, guys. If you look at the way this line opened, it was Giants laying 5.5. Julian mentioned it. Some shops even touched 6 at one point. It's down to 4. Yesterday was 4.5. This movement has been consistent in favor of the Arizona Cardinals. Cardinals are super contrarian. They're only getting 20% of bets. This is an auto bet for the public. Giants in Survivor, Giants to cover, Giants to get right. But again, you got to stay true to the market, or at least that's what I try to do. This line's falling toward Arizona. 2 winless teams take the dog. It's a system mentioned earlier. 65% against the spread the last since like 2005. Make sure you find the hook, though. I think that's so important. It's one thing we stress on this show. If you do like Arizona, and maybe you don't like them, but you feel like it's a sharp bet, make sure you get the 4.5 with the hook.
Very quickly, like Commanders 3.5. Julian, where are you at here?
Broncos. I went down with the Broncos last week. I'm going down with the Broncos again. They need to win this game after disappointing last week, and Washington stinks.
Okay, that wasn't one word. Josh.
I'll take the dog. Dogs 3.5 or more, who missed the playoffs the previous season and 56% against the spread last 4 years.
Missed the playoffs because they stink.
Beautiful. That was the 4 p.m. slate. We're going to take another quick break here. Talk about that game last night in Boulder. Plus, Ross Tucker joins us to give out his Tucker's takes for this Week 2 slate. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Colorado defeated Colorado State 43-35 in 2 overtimes last night. Thoughts and prayers to everyone who stayed up for that and is already watching the show on this early Sunday morning.
I don't think that's anyone.
That might not be anyone.
I woke up with tweets to the end of the game that were like 2.5 hours old.
Yeah, it was a late one there last night, but Shedeur Sanders goes absolute Brady mode to give Colorado the win, and then the Shohei Ohtani of Colorado, Travis Hunter, out at least a few weeks after a pretty nasty hit during that game. But guys, this was obviously a lot of attention on this game here. The money coming into the sports books was massive. Colorado was, 24.5 point favorites in
24, 23.5, 24.
Obviously, not even close to covering that spread, but what's most important is that Colorado got the win there. Julian, what are your thoughts about this game and how it played out?
A lot of thoughts, really. I mean, impressive dig deep win at home to do that 98-yard drive to get it to overtime and for Colorado to win the game. But the market has finally, caught up. This is what, pros and Joes have been going after all season. Everybody loves the public betting Colorado. Pros are taking their opponents. Finally, that plus 24, plus 23.5 looks pretty silly when you have a game go to double overtime. So we've already seen next week at Oregon on deck. I wish I had laid the 14 with the Ducks yesterday. It's now 17.5. We're starting to finally see that this Colorado team is human, and when they play the big dogs, it might not look as pretty.
Josh, I know you have little thoughts here on that spread that we saw there for yesterday.
Yeah, and I think, Steve, the happiest people in the world today are the odds makers, the house, because this was such a lopsided play toward Colorado. I mean, you look across the market.
Could not get a bet on the dog.
85, 90% or more bets are on Colorado. So I think this is just kind of a test case in terms of, being aware of kind of alarm bells or things you should be worried about. Anytime you see such lopsided action, and also if you read between the lines and you hear bookmakers ever say, we really need this, I always want to be on the side of what they need. Now, it's not always going to win. If you go back a week ago against Nebraska, they really needed Nebraska. Colorado rolled, so Colorado did reward the public. But if you keep doing that every time, more often than not, Steve, the house is going to win. That's kind of the biggest cliche you're ever going to hear. But anytime it's 90% or more and the line moves so much, I mean, that was like a minus 19 opener, got all the way to 23, laying the worst of the number with the public and most heavily bet game of the night, that's a recipe for disaster. So teachable moment moving forward.
Julian, real quick here, thoughts on the loss of Hunter and what that means for Colorado moving forward?
It's big. That one hit, and now you're down your wide receiver one and your cornerback one. So, with how good, you mentioned the Ohtani comparison, two-way players. With how good those guys are, the thing is when they get hurt, those two players on both sides of the ball are one guy. So that's also going to hurt Colorado moving forward, as good as Shedeur Sanders looked in that comeback.
And speaking of one guy who has an easy schedule this week, Emerson Latzia caught up with Ross Tucker to go over some Week 2 thoughts. Let's take a look.
Thank you, kind sir. We are now joined by podcaster, broadcaster, former NFL lineman Ross Tucker here to dive into some of these meaty Week 2 matchups. And Ross, the Jets overcome a season-ending injury to Aaron Rodgers to win last Monday night. But this game against Dallas, what is it going to tell us about the Jets' ceiling without Aaron?
Probably a decent amount, right? Because they're going against a team in the Dallas Cowboys. I think I have them number 2 in the Ross Tucker podcast power rankings. They were obviously fantastic in Week 1 against the New York Giants. And this will be different, right? It's one thing for Zach Wilson to just have to go into the game. And I thought he did some good things, obviously some bad things as well. But now the Cowboys are preparing and planning for Wilson all week. But conversely, so are the Jets. So I think this will be a pretty good indicator, right? Like if the Jets can at least hang with the Cowboys, I feel like that bodes well for the rest of the season. I feel like that's actually a positive sign. If they get blown out, well, then there will be people starting to question, again, just what the Jets can accomplish without Rodgers, and probably rightfully so.
Yeah, and on the opposite side, on the flip side of that Monday Night Football game, the Bills have a Josh Allen problem right now, Ross. He can't stop turning the football over. Was this a step back? Have the Bills taken a step back here, or do you expect them to get back on track against the Raiders?
I don't think they've taken a step back. I just don't think they've taken a step forward. I'm not sure where the Buffalo Bills are better this year. I mean, they got a couple new guards. Maybe they're a little bit better there. I think they like Dalton Kincaid, the rookie tight end from Utah, who can play in the slot a little bit. But watching the Bills, for me, Emerson, was just kind of same old, right? You know, Josh Allen trying to do too much, forcing the ball, taking hits that he shouldn't take. I mean, he gets hit and takes some shots that are just so unnecessary. The offensive line still not great. Now, they went against a very good Jets front, so that was an issue. But the Bills are the same team I feel like they've been the last 4 or 5 years, and it's not great. You know, I mean, they're a very good team, but I think if you're hoping that this is the year that they get over the hump and get to the Super Bowl, man, it was not a very good start at all. I do think playing at home against the Raiders is a pretty good spot. The Raiders didn't overly impress me. Congrats to them for getting the win, but I expect the Bills to bounce back here.
All right, what about the Giants? You expect them to bounce back against Arizona? This is a team that looked like it forgot how to play football.
Can you imagine if they lose this game?
I can't.
Like how bad that would be to lose 40-0 at home and then go on the road and lose the Cardinals? It won't happen. I mean, now that'd be bad, but I do think the Giants come out and play much better. You know, we tend to overstate what happens in week one. It's a unique entity unto itself. It really is. I mean, you know, there's new coaches, there's new schemes, there's new personnel, and we it's the only thing we have, right? It's the only thing we have to go on, so we put so much into that small sample size. I think the Giants will bounce back, be much better. I like them to take care of business against the Cardinals.
What about the Bengals? Because that offense scaring its fan base in that season-opening loss against the Browns. Meanwhile, the Ravens now come to town, and the Ravens losing J.K. Dobbins. Who knows how that could change the offensive game plan now moving forward in Baltimore. What did you learn, if anything, that concerns you about these two division rivals?
Well, both these offenses didn't look good, right? And I would say the thing that concerns me the most is the Ravens' injuries. You know, I mean, not only J.K. Dobbins, but Marcus Williams with the torn pec. They're banged up with Linderbaum and Stanley on the offensive line. Not good. And it feels like this is the same Ravens every year in terms of the injuries. And then Lamar Jackson, Emerson, that was one of his worst games ever.
Yep.
And this is a new offense. Everybody's supposed to be excited about it. I don't know. That wasn't a real good, real encouraging start, I would say, for the Ravens offense. For the Bengals, it felt like more of the same from last year. Last year, they got off to a horrible start as well, but eventually righted the ship.
Chiefs visiting America's team, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Game of the week, in my humble opinion. Tell me why Kansas City will be leaving Jacksonville 0-2.
Well, because, you know, we'll see just how healthy Kelce is, right? I mean, you know, coming off that injury and being banged up, that's something to keep an eye on for sure, his status throughout the contest. And we'll see what Chris Jones brings to the table. The Jags, you know, I thought it might have been a little bit overhyped with Calvin Ridley coming into the year. No, it was properly hyped. Calvin Ridley is really that good and excelled in his first game with the Jags. We'll see if he can do it again against the Chiefs.
That's the best quarterback wide receiver duo in the NFL. Next closest one after that, Ross, could be Tua and Tyreek Hill. You're going to be on the call of this game tonight on Sunday Night Football. Do you see Tua outdueling his old college teammate Mac Jones in Foxborough against the Patriots?
Well, I do, but I don't think it'll be Tyreek Hill. There is no way that Belichick is going to let Tyreek Hill totally light them up and ruin the game, right? So start to look at some of the other guys. Dolphins might have to run the ball. Dolphins might have to give it to some of these other guys. Maybe, you know, Waddle. It's not going to be Tyreek Hill. I'd be stunned if he had a huge game. Bill Belichick is not going to let that guy be the reason why they lose.
All right, it is early in the year. We're 1 week in, but where does Tua rank among your early MVP candidates, huh? A lot of people have him as the front runner.
For sure. I mean, he was like one of the only quarterbacks that seemed like really played well.
Yeah.
And it might have been his best game, which is very promising. If the season ended right now, Emerson, and let me check. It does not.
No,
it does not, in fact, end right now. But if it did, Tua would be the MVP.
Ross Tucker, it was damn good seeing you. Looking forward to catching up with you more throughout the season, talking football. And don't forget, all of you watching right now, you can check out new episodes of the Ross Tucker Football Podcast right here on DK Network, Monday through Friday night, 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Go download and subscribe to all the other podcasts he does as well. This man is one of the busiest dudes in media. Congrats again on your CBS debut last week, Ross. We appreciate you. Now back to you gentlemen in the other studio.
You know, to be fair, I don't think there could be a worse bet than taking an MVP bet after week 1. I mean, talk about overreactions. Tua played
That
fantastic.
is a week 1 overreaction.
But my goodness, take an MVP bet in week 1, let's hold our horses there. But don't hold your horses, because we are going to be back for hour number 2 here on The Sweat. Julie and I are going to do a little NFL price check to help make your daily fantasy lineups. We'll go over some cornerbacks to target for some wide receiver props, and we'll get into some prime time picks or some Sunday night games, some Monday night games. It is action-packed. It is full. This is The Sweat from DraftKings. That's us. Yeah, we'll be right back.
Got that right.
Welcome back to The Sweat, hour number 2 here from DraftKings. We got a lot to get to. We're going to be looking at the primetime preview for our Sunday night and Monday night primetime games here. Also, we're going to have Steve and Julian look at some DFS, help you set your lineups here. But before we do, let's look at who are the biggest risers when it comes to wide receivers in the NFL right now from a daily fantasy perspective. Number 1, Zay Flowers, absolutely lit it up. The pride of Boston College. We've seen his price increase 4,000 to 5,000. He led the team in targets, 10 targets overall, more than Odell Beckham, more than anyone else, 9 catches, 78 yards. Also, Tutu Atwell, pair of Rams receivers here, taking in a lot of money. He went from 3,000 to 4,700. He had a great game, 6 catches, 119 yards, 8 targets. Second on the team, Puka Nacua. Now, if you ever go to pub trivia, who's Puka Nacua? 5th-round pick out of BYU. He was fantastic in the opener. He absolutely lit it up here. He had 10 catches, 119 yards, led the team to see the price increase rise as well. So those are the risers here from a wide receiver standpoint. Now let's kick it over to Julian and Steve to help you set your DFS lineups for week 2.
Hey, that was some good trivia there, Josh. I'm going to write that down with a crayon.
Did you know you went to BYU?
No, I know I didn't.
Oh,
That's
you
why
do?
the good stuff. See,
You
that's
have a
why.
crayon?
Yeah, I've got a crayon here somewhere. I'll scribble it down.
I don't see when he's lying.
That's
Go
okay.
ahead.
All right, but what we're not lying about is we're going to do our daily fantasy price check segment
We
here.
are.
Get you ready for us to build your lineups here. Obviously, the Millie Maker is up here today. Let's talk about and kick it off with the wide receivers.
Yep.
I like Davante Adams in this spot here. Like I mentioned, we talked about this earlier in the show. No Jacoby Myers in this game, so now we're talking about Davante Adams, who is going to be literally the guy in this offense here today, aside from Josh Jacobs here, but should be getting those double-digit targets without Myers. Myers last week had 10. Davante Adams had 9, and then like I mentioned earlier, no other receivers on the Raiders from last week had more than 1 target. The running back, Josh Jacobs, had 3. After that, nobody else had more than 1. Should get Tre'Davious White in coverage, but I think that's okay. When you're getting all those targets to Davante Adams, he should feast in this matchup against the Bills. You're also going with somebody on that team, correct?
Yeah, I don't question the volume for Davante Adams at all. I do question the Raiders on those back-to-back road games and all the attention that Adams might get with Myers, who was so successful as that second fiddle last week. So I'm going with Stephon Diggs on the other side of this game as my favorite receiver. Against that elite Jets defense, as bad as the Bills' offense looked last week, Diggs was targeted 13 times. He had double-digit receptions, went over 100 yards, and had a touchdown. In this bounce-back spot at home against a Raiders secondary that I'm not too high on. Sure, you can look good against the Broncos. I don't think you're going to look good on the road against a hungry Bills team in Week 2. So this should be a matchup. I'm expecting a pretty similar line to 10 receptions, 100 yards, and a touchdown here for Stephon Diggs at home.
All right, let's talk about the quarterback position, kind of staying with that game, going on a little bit of the opposite side here for me. I do like Josh Allen a lot here going against.
We just built a stack.
We do. This is the stacking
Opposite
abilities
picks.
here. But Josh Allen going against this Raiders defense, these guys aren't even on the same level as the Jets. They're not going to get any pressure on Josh Allen. That was one of the biggest things that he had issues with last week, which led to a lot of those interceptions that he threw. He was on under pressure of 40% of his dropbacks. If you look at that game last week with the Broncos, Russell Wilson didn't even test this defense last week. Only made 9 pass attempts of at least 10 yards or more. Just wasn't going downfield at all. And then we think about all those interceptions that Josh Allen threw last week. He was accurate on the most part, other than those interceptions. There were just a couple of bad throws there. Still completed 71 of his pass attempts. Had an adjusted completion percentage of 77%, which basically measures your how your passes were on target there. So I like a lot Josh Allen this week at the quarterback position. You're going with an ugly name in this one here.
Well, we're spending too much money here. We're talking about all these guys at the top of the board. I'm going to save us some money. Baker Mayfield down at just barely cracking 5K. Baker Mayfield impressed in Week 1 in Minnesota. He had, not necessarily from a yardage standpoint, 173, but he threw 2 touchdowns in the win. I think this is a game that we haven't really touched on the show so far. I am not a believer in the Bears. I know the Bears are going to be a sharp bet here to bounce back down in Tampa, sell high on Tampa, who just got the win as road dogs. Jordan Love was the only quarterback in the NFL last week to have 3 passing touchdowns and 0 interceptions. I think this is a good matchup for Tampa. You can easily stack him with a Mike Evans who caught one of those touchdowns, save some cash, expose the Bears defense, pay $5,000 for Baker Mayfield.
Moving over to the running back position, going in that Cowboys and Jets game, like Tony Pollard here today, in a game where the Cowboys are already almost 10-point favorites at this point here. Last week, didn't have a ton of carries, but he did take 6 carries inside the red zone last week. If you look at that game against the Bills only had 18 carries in that game last week, but they did average 5.4 yards per carry as a team as a whole. Pollard, in the limited amount that he needed to carry the ball, 22.2 DraftKings fantasy points on 16 total touches, 82 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Obviously, this game could get out of hand quickly for the Jets on the Jets side there, so then you have Tony Pollard just running the ball to kind of get this game out. I think Tony Pollard is in an excellent spot against this team. I think he's one of my favorite running backs on this slate. What do you think about the running back position?
Well, I just saved you money with Baker Mayfield, so I'm allowed to spend it now. I'm spending $8,900 on Christian McCaffrey. CMC dominated the workload in Week 1 against Pittsburgh in that 30-7 win. 22 carries for $152 and a touchdown. He caught 3 of his 5 targets. Now, we're going up against the Rams here as a touchdown or more favorite. This is a matchup that the Niners should dominate, and I love the workload from McCaffrey. In games that Elijah Mitchell has played with McCaffrey, that kind of hindered him a little bit last year. Elijah Mitchell would steal a good amount of that workload. It was even closer to a timeshare when they initially traded for McCaffrey. Week 1 was the most that McCaffrey has played in terms of percentage of the snaps in a game that he has shared the field with Elijah Mitchell. I love that going forward. Won't steal too much of the late workload. I expect a big stat line from CMC.
All right, you and I are both going very cheap on tight end. Usually that's the way to go unless you're paying up for Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce. But I'm going back to somebody I was on last week as well on the Packers, Luke Musgrave in this spot, only 3,200. The box score wasn't huge for Musgrave last week, had 4 targets, made 3 catches for 50 yards, and only 8 DraftKings fantasy points. But this is what I loved about what I saw last week. His average distance of target was 18 for this game. He led the team in snaps, playing on 45 of the 60 total snaps for the Packers here. Him and Jordan Love really kind of built a rapport during the preseason that's already carried over here to the regular season as well. I think this is a great spot to really kind of save at the tight end position. Only 3,200 here. This allows you to pay up for some of the more premier positions in your lineups here, whether it's wide receiver, quarterback, or running back. So I think this is an excellent spot here for Luke Musgrave. Once again, truly, he could have had a much bigger game than we saw last week. I think he can do it here this week as well. So give me Musgrave at the tight end position. You're also going cheap as well.
Yeah, I like the Musgrave pick too, but I'm going to go with Adam Troutman on the Denver side. Greg Dulcich goes down with an injury in Week 1. Adam Troutman plays 72% of the snaps, catches all 5 of his targets from Russell Wilson for a modest 34 yards. But if you're getting 5 receptions at $3,000, you're looking pretty good. Washington, nothing that's going to scare me away there in terms of a team defending tight ends. So I think it's a good matchup. I think it should be relatively efficient. And like you said, you just made reference to Russell Wilson's inability to go downfield.
Right.
That means more work in the tight end in the middle on those short routes.
Yeah, just quick note, too, on Musgrave that I failed to mention. Falcons were one of the worst teams in the league against the tight end position. Last year, they allowed a 67% completion rate, 970 yards, and 7 touchdowns to that position last year. So thinking about Aaron Jones being out, Christian Watson being out as well, I think this is going to be a really big spot here for Musgrave. All right, let's talk defense, special teams. I'm going with the Buccaneers here. You were going with Baker Mayfield. I like the Buccaneers at this point here. It's the price point that really gets to me here because they're only 3,200. Where is everybody going to gravitate towards when picking a defense? It's going to be to those teams, you know, like the Cowboys going against the Jets or whatnot. So I want to go a little bit against the grain here. So I wouldn't say that the Bucs defensive line is strong necessarily, but I would say that the Bears' offensive line is near the bottom of the league, and that's where I think they're going to win these matchups here, especially against someone with Justin Fields. And there's one thing that I noticed last week that really I think could be the difference maker here for the Bucs. Justin Fields was throwing the ball a ton last week, 37 pass attempts in that game. In his career, that was the second highest amount that we've seen in his entire career. If the Bears are actually going to be making Justin Fields throw the ball much more, this is just a fantastic opportunity for the Buccaneers to get some of those turnovers and really be the difference maker in those lineups because the defense, the ownership on that defense, it looks like it's going to be extremely low. So give me the Buccaneers as a DST option, 3,200. Love them today. Where are you going for this one?
Well, Steve, you mentioned all eyes on the Cowboys defense potentially against the Jets. What if I told you could maybe get the best defense in the NFL for $2,700? Let's look at the other side of that game. The total's getting slammed down. The Jets, I know they're going on the road against the high-powered Cowboys, but What? We don't see Dak Prescott make mistakes? He missed games last year and led the league in interceptions. I think the Jets are going to rally around this opportunity to play without Aaron Rodgers and show that they can still compete. I don't think they're going to necessarily win the game, but I think this is going to be a grinder in Dallas. And this defense that just forced, 4 or 5 turnovers against Josh Allen and the Bills, now you have an opportunity to go against the Cowboys. I think the Jets are going to look just fine in this spot.
No, that's a great point, too, because we talked about earlier in the show how much that total has dropped now. What's it, at 38.5, or I think it is right now? And
down
this was
like
a game.
8 points.
Yeah, so this is a game that was once at 46.5. It's dropped 8 points. So now, in daily fantasy, normally, you're targeting these games in these low potential scoring games. So with how much this has dropped, I think this is a great opportunity to take the Jets there. So I like that call a lot here as well. Any final thoughts here? Any other plays that we didn't get to you want to kind of point out here? Any props that you like maybe as well?
I just think there's a lot of good, like 2 of the props that I won in week 1 were Kenneth Gainwell over 22.5 rushing yards.
Yeah.
He obviously got the start and went into the 50s, and Tank Dell over 14.5 receiving yards. I just like looking at some of these low numbers. They make for good DFS value plays and good overs and props. Adam Troutman's 2.5 receptions, 23.5 yards, low guys like that.
All right, so that's going to do it for this segment here. I want to remind everybody, coming up 10 a.m. Eastern, right after the show, it's the Lombardi Line coming your way 10 a.m. Eastern on DraftKings Network and VSiN. For us, coming up next, we're diving into some picks for this week's 3 primetime matchups, starting with a divisional showdown between 2 former Alabama teammates. We'll be right back here on The Sweat.
New England is efficient. Miami's dynamic. It's a total clash of styles. That's why I can't wait to watch this game.
Mac Jones is a top what QB in the NFL?
He's top 16. Just look at the physical skills and just kind of average.
I like Tua, but he's small, he's not athletic, arm is good enough, he's been hurt a lot.
These guys are virtually interchangeable players. Who would I take? Tell me what offense we have.
Wow, a lot of hot takes there in that montage. Welcome back to the Sweat. Steve Buchanan, Julian Edlow, Josh Applebaum. We're going to talk about some primetime picks. 3 primetime games in week 2. Do we like that?
I love it. Reminds me of the COVID days. I don't want to go back to those. Remember when we had those like Monday, Tuesday doubleheaders? That was kind of fun.
Oh my God, I forgot about the Tuesday doubleheaders. Yeah. I forgot all about that.
It breaks up. I mean, we have so many games in all the windows, right?
Yeah.
If you can break them up more and get more eyes on them, let's go for it.
Yeah, well, without a doubt. Let's start with Dolphins at Patriots there. Obviously, that lovely montage kind of hyping us up there. I like the under in this game, but under 46.5. I think it's very clear the Patriots defense is legit, and I think they're also going to struggle on offense. I think we saw that last week against the Eagles. And let's not take away anything from the Dolphins. Their secondary is very, very strong, and there's a lot of questions about these Patriots receivers. Like, there's a lot of news coming out in Boston that Juju Smith-Schuster is, like, they're saying the 5th best option on that team right now. A lot of questions about the health and the status of his knee. They're saying it's, like, on the brink of exploding, whatever that means. But then again, Miami is a team that's going to want you to run the ball. And I think from what we saw last week between Stevenson and Zeke Elliott, maybe Zeke actually was the guy that looked the best out of the bunch there, but I don't see them really racking up the yards against this Miami defense. So for me, I like the under in this one here at 46.5. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I like the under play here if I had to pick a side on the total. If I had to pick a side on the game, I would lean towards the home dog in the Patriots, but I want to see, first of all, how dinged up that offensive line winds up being, who's in, who's out. And also I want the 3. So I have a lot of needs here in terms of playing a side. But what I will say, Ramondre Stevenson for a prop, over 50.5, 51.5 rushing yards. I know you mentioned Zeke being involved, but I think Ramondre is the guy who played significantly more snaps and out-carried Zeke 12-7 in week 1. Miami got gashed by the Chargers on the ground in week 1, well over 200 yards. I think if you're going to play with Miami here in that high-powered offense in that passing game, you want to run the ball, keep the ball out of their hands. So I think Stevenson is in for a pretty good workload in this game. I would look to him for a prop that I'll probably wind up on come Sunday Night Football.
Yeah, Stevenson in terms of a touchdown, plus 105. That's the top of the board there. And then Ezekiel Elliott is down at plus 260. Still don't mind either one there because, again, I think the Patriots are going to have to run the ball in this game. But what's your take on this one here, Josh?
So to your guys' points in terms of the total, do lean under with you. Outdoor divisional unders are 61% over the last 4 seasons. Primetime unders are even better, like 62% over the last 4 seasons. And again, typically you see some of these lower scoring games when these teams play. But I'm going to take the Patriots plus 3 here, guys. Now, the important thing is it is 2.5 at most shops. So, number one, you can wait to see if the public moves it up to 3. Or again, I mentioned this a few times today, but buying points. It's juiced up in favor of the Dolphins. You can get the Patriots plus 2.5 even money right now. You take them up to 3, the key number, paying that price, be like minus 120. But I like this spot for New England. They're off a loss. Miami is off a win. And then also it's a tough spot for Miami. They open on the road on the West Coast, came back to Florida. Now they got to come north to New England. And in this spot here, you have a lot of system matches with the Patriots. Divisional dogs are 57% against the spread over the last 3 seasons. You also look at primetime dogs, 59% over the last 4 seasons. So to me, this is a spot where if you can wait it out or buy it up to 3, this is a really contrarian play too. Almost 80% of bets, guys, are on the Dolphins here. I think the Patriots are going to play well tonight. I'll take the plus 3. Wait for it or buy it up to 3.
All right, so this will take care of the Sunday night game. Let's move to Monday where we got 2 games. We got Saints at Panthers starting at 7:15 p.m. Eastern. I like a prop here for Derek Carr, and I like him to go over 37.5 for his longest completion of the game. Here's one thing that I really like about this Saints offense when it comes to Derek Carr. He is not afraid to go deep downfield. In that game last week, he had 9 pass attempts of 20 yards or more. That was tied with Kirk Cousins for the most of week 1. He completed 4 of those for 107 yards, average distance of target of 27.3 in that game. And the nice thing about this too, those targets were all spread out to all of his receivers. Rashid Shaheed had 3 on the day. Chris Olave had 2, and then we had 4 other players with 1 target of 20 yards or more, including Michael Thomas, who looked really good in that game last week. If they're really going to start to get something out of him, there's one thing that we can't forget, how good he was when he's healthy. This is somebody who, when he's been healthy, is averaging almost 11 yards per reception for his career. So with all those weapons at his disposal and the willingness for Carr to go deep downfield, longest completion, over 37.5 yards. I think that's something that he can complete in this game against the Panthers with a pretty questionable secondary. That's my take there. Josh, what do you like in this one?
I'm going to take the Panthers +3. I'm holding out for a hook 3.5. Again, this is Monday night tomorrow, so maybe you're going to get that line to move up here. But I think the fact that the books don't want to go to 3.5, that tells me a lot, guys. This is the most lopsided play of NFL Week 2. Currently, 81%, almost 85% of bets are going with New Orleans. And this reminds me a lot of that Bills and Jets game, primetime game from last week, where the look at on this one was New Orleans only like -1.5 on the road. They're getting so much love. They're all the way up to 3. I'm not going to call the Carolina Panthers a sharp play, but to me it's a value play. Super contrarian, primetime, bet against the public. These divisional dogs have been great historically, as well as primetime dogs. And again, everyone and their mothers here is on New Orleans. If you're going to go contrarian, you really do like Carolina in this spot. I'll take the 3. And guys, maybe a lower scoring game. Did open like 42. Total's now down to like 39.5.
Yeah. What do you think, Julian?
Yeah, I like a lot of these primetime dogs, short home dogs that we're going to be talking about in this segment, but the Panthers are not the one. You got to go the other way on one of them, and this is the one. I'm riding with the Joe Public play here. I think the Saints are significantly better than the Carolina Panthers. Rookie quarterback, early in his career, not many weapons, and you mentioned the dinged-up secondary for the Panthers as well, Steve. New Orleans played in a battle with the Titans in Week 1, and I think that kind of maybe looked a little worse than it was. I think that the Saints had a lot of chances to pull away in that game, and I think they will pull away against the Panthers. Panthers got smoked by a Falcons team, making Atlanta, I think, maybe look a little bit better than they are.
That's why they're going to lose today.
Well, yep, we're going to talk about that one that I'm just going to stay away from, but I think that New Orleans is the significantly better team, and the futures market kind of tells us that. New Orleans 10.5, Panthers down to 6.5, I think, on the win totals. So I'm kind of surprised that there's so much resistance at the 3.5. I would think this would move to 3.5 and stay there.
So now we got Browns and Steelers. This one has moved pretty significantly. This was Steelers 3.5 yesterday. Now it's down Steelers 2.5 at this point. When it was at that 3.5, I was looking to use the Steelers as a teaser leg piece, getting them up to 9.5. You definitely still can, but obviously, ideally, would like to get that 9.5 instead. And I was looking to pair it with the Niners, getting them down to -1.5 in their game there. So kind of waiting to see if this line moves again. I mean, begrudgingly, I will take the 8.5 if I need to, but obviously, ideally, you want to get that 3.5 there. But in those low total games, and this is one of the lowest totals of the week now at 38.5, getting the Steelers up to 9.5 obviously makes that a very appealing play here. But what do you guys feel about this one? We'll start with you, Josh.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you, Steve. Definitely the under's gotten hit, 43 down to 38.5. This would be a divisional under, primetime under, all the system matches we're talking about. Pretty good low bets, higher dollars, too. I think it's only like 40% bets, 60% money on the under. But I like Pittsburgh in this spot. This is the ultimate buy low, sell high. Week 2 is commonly referred to as that overreaction week. Well, what did these teams do in Week 1? Cleveland was fantastic, upsetting the Bengals. It was a huge win for Wise Guys, who dropped that line down to Cleveland. And Pittsburgh was the complete opposite. They were the most underwhelming, disappointing team of the week, got absolutely rolled. Wise Guys like them too got that one wrong, as the 49ers absolutely destroyed Pittsburgh here. But Pittsburgh looked terrible. Cleveland looked great. Everybody's betting Cleveland here. They're getting 75, 80% of bets. I think it's an opportunity to buy low on Pittsburgh here. One good system match, not just Mike Tomlin as a dog. He's 65% against the spread when he's getting points, but dogs off a blowout loss of 20 points or more. This is the angle to buy low on these teams. It's 62% against the spread the last decade. Again, I'm waiting for a 3. It's tomorrow night. If not, I'll take the 2.5, but I got to take Pittsburgh, Pickett, and Tomlin tomorrow night.
Jules?
Yeah, home dog in the under. We're aligned here. I think Pittsburgh is a play that I would prioritize over the under. I think it's a little bit better of a play, but I like both of them. And Josh mentioned Browns look fantastic. They looked fantastic in a lot of ways. The quarterback did not. They got away with poor quarterback. You rarely get away with poor quarterback play and blow out the Bengals, but that's exactly what the Browns did. And I think that that's being totally overlooked. Now Deshaun Watson's going to go on the road against a good defense that's hungry for a win after that embarrassing loss and probably look even worse. So I really like the Pittsburgh side of this game. I think that they're now larger underdogs at home against the Browns than they were against the Niners. The Niners, they ran into a freight train last week, and now it's creating some value here.
Julian, I'm going to quickly throw this question to you. AFC North all playing each other here.
Yeah.
Ravens and Browns both 2-1 to win the division. Bengals at plus 245. Steelers at plus 750. Any opportunity to buy here before those games take place?
Yeah, the two last ones you mentioned, Bengals and Steelers, I think would be the best values.
No doubt. They're Steelers plus 750. Could be 0-2 after this, but we'll take a look at that. Okay, we're going to wrap here. We're going to take another break here. We've got a great segment coming up, cornering the market. We're going to tell you which cornerbacks you should be picking on today for your fantasy receivers and player props. Cornering the market with Josh and myself when we come back here on The Sweat. Welcome back to The Sweat. I am Steve Buchanan, joined alongside Josh Applebaum. We're going to talk about some cornerbacks you can target when you're building your DFS lineups or making some wide receiver prop bets for this afternoon. And what we like to do here is kind of look at how they performed the week before, who they're going to be lined up against this week, and that's how we can kind of decipher if it's going to be a good play or a bad play. So let's start off here with Tyreek Hill going up against the Patriots and Christian Gonzalez. Now, to be fair, this is going to be something that he's likely going to be seeing double coverage in. So it's not just specifically going to be the rookie first round pick in Christian Gonzalez, but you talk about what Tyreek Hill did last week. His average distance to target was at 15.7 in week 1. He averaged a ridiculous 6.1 yards per route run last week. That was almost 2 yards higher than any receiver who logged at least 3 targets last week. Let's take a look at the numbers from Christian Gonzalez in his debut last week for the Patriots. Now, to be fair, while this looks pretty ugly, Christian Gonzalez did make a lot of plays for the Patriots last week, but in coverage is where he was struggling. He was targeted against 10 times in that game last week, 7 catches, so that gives him a 70% reception rate, and then 10 yards per reception on those 7 catches. Now, we talk about obviously how dynamic Tyreek Hill can be, the speed that he has. He's literally one of the most impossible players to cover at this point. Is there any side that you like when it comes to Tyreek Hill props going up against Christian Gonzalez?
Yeah, so I think if you look at the props right now, it's like hammer all these overs. I mean, the numbers are so low. It's 5.5 catches today for Tyreek Hill, over -135, 79.5 receiving yards. I mean, he's done this in the first quarter sometimes, Steve, going over these numbers. But if it looks too good to be true, typically it is. You got to look at the matchup, and that's why I really like this segment, Steve, when you look at, again, who he's going to be going up against. It's not a love as much for Christian Gonzalez. Remember, there's a big injury here. Jonathan Jones, his Patriots cornerback. He's kind of one of their team leaders. He's really held down Tyreek Hill over the last few years here. He's expected to probably miss this game. He hasn't practiced. He may play, he may not. It's trending toward not. Keep an eye on the injury report here. But this is what Tyreek Hill has done against these Belichick defenses. Last year, as his first year with the Miami Dolphins, he had 4 catches for 55 yards at New England. He had 8 catches for 93 yards at Miami. These aren't Tyreek Hill numbers we're used to. They're much lower here. So even though Jonathan Jones is expected to miss this game, it's a big test for Gonzalez. This is tough going from college, now having to cover Tyreek Hill. But what do we know about Belichick? He really tries to limit or negate your number one option. You mentioned it, Steve, double teams, trying to make Tyreek Hill, limit him as much as you can. My angle here would be I'd maybe go over 5.5 catches just because he could get you 6 catches, Steve, but I'm not going to go over that receiving yards total. I could see 6 catches for 68 yards or something like that.
And then just one other thing you can mention too, if all the attention is on Tyreek Hill, what does that do?
Other guys.
Opens up guys like Jalen Waddle, who obviously can be a huge threat for the Dolphins as well. So just something to keep in mind when you're making your bets or you're making your daily fantasy lineup. Let's go to the next one here. Amon-Ra St. Brown going up against the Seahawks and cornerback Kobe Bryant here. If you want to talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown, obviously the number one guy in this Lions offense right now, and it doesn't even look like it's close at this point. He's somebody that's been the go-to guy for Jared Goff. Talking about the cornerback here, going with Kobe Bryant, he's got some pretty poor numbers from last week and the year prior as well. Last year in coverage, he was targeted against 67 times, allowed 50 receptions for 10.3 yards and 515 total yards. Goff should have plenty of time to throw in this game too as well. We talk about how strong that offensive line has been for the Lions thus far, giving Jared Goff plenty of time to throw in this game. And if you remember, you go back to last year when these two teams met up, I think it was in week 4, he threw for 378 yards and 4 touchdowns, and that was without Amon-Ra St. Brown healthy in that game. But again here, the numbers for Bryant from last week, 10 targets again, a 70% reception rate, 9.1 yards per reception. I think Bryant's going to have his hands full in this game going up against Amon-Ra St. Brown. I really don't think that there's a way that you can take the unders on St. Brown in this point here. Again, the spread has dropped here. This was -6 for the Lions at one point. It's down to 4.5 at this point. Does that change anything for you, or do you think this is still a great spot for St. Brown?
So you mentioned it from a just plain betting perspective here. Line is going the other way here against the Lions. Tells me smart money is coming in on the dog. But I'm with you, Steve. I'd go with St. Brown. A lot of overs here today. Over 6.5 catches is -120. Juiced up a little bit, telling you he could have a big day. 75.5 receiving yards. That's -150. -115 both sides, a little bit lower of a juice price here. Number one, he's rested. I think that's huge. He played Thursday night, got a little extra time off here, not just to rest your body, but also film, game plan, get ready. You're at home, you're in the dome. These are all factors and benefits. For St. Brown, he's been Jared Goff's go-to guy. He had 6 catches for 71 yards and a touchdown against Kansas City. He led the team with 9 targets. I think he's in for a big day here today, Steve. And again, this is a situation where can he, kind of pick on a cornerback here who really isn't. He's got a famous name, Kobe, Kobe Bryant, but really not in terms of NFL experience. So I'd hit both these St. Brown overs, catches and yards.
We talked about it earlier here. This looks like a great bounce back spot for the Bengals, who looked absolutely atrocious last week. Joe Burrow in particular really kind of just trying to come back from not playing the preseason here. So I like someone like Tyler Boyd in this matchup against the Ravens. They're going to be without their top cornerback and Humphreys. They're going to be without their top free safety here. And like we mentioned, no one from the Bengals is going to have strong numbers from last week because of that putrid performance that they put out there last week. But you look at someone like Tyler Boyd, who is going to dominate those snaps in the slot there, played 85% of his snaps there last week, which was in line with where he was last year. Total on the year, 83% of the snaps was coming from the slot. Now, the matchup he has today going up against Adarius Washington. One thing that I like here too, besides the putrid numbers that Washington had last week, he was only targeted against 4 times. All of them were caught for 6.5 yards per reception. But here's the thing I like about this matchup in particular. There's a massive height advantage for Tyler Boyd going up against Washington. Boyd is 6'2", Washington is 5'8". So we're talking about a significant height difference here. Boyd has been someone like that Burrow can go to if he just needs one of those quick throws or whatever, but truly there is no matchup here that the Bengals receivers shouldn't win, but this one in particular for Washington, against Washington I should say, I think this is a really strong spot for Boyd.
It does feel like a good spot. I think it's a good spot for the Ravens as well. If you like Baltimore like I do, get the 3.5 right now. Still available at most books at this point. Looking like it may get down to 3. Divisional matchup. Harbaugh, Jackson as a dog, both have been great. It's tough for me, Steve. I like kind of the buy low factor of Tyler Boyd, just feeling like, hey, all this attention here on Chase and Higgins. He feels like the guy that's always open, but he hasn't really produced for you against Cleveland. I know you mentioned it. Everyone looked bad. 2 catches, 10 yards. He only had 3 targets. So I'll go to the equalizer here, the betting market. At DraftKings, his prop right now, 3.5 catches, it's under -140. So again, I think if you look at these juice prices, it's not just what you have to pay the books, it's also giving you an indication of where the smart money might be leaning. It always gets me, Steve, when an under is being juiced up. I think it's easy to juice up an over because the public's going to bet overs 99% of the time. The fact it's so expensive to take the under, I'm going to go under Tyler Boyd, 3.5 catches today.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, too, there's a lot of guys that Burrow can go to. Obviously, with Jamar Chase. T. Higgins didn't have a catch last week. Irv Smith Jr. at the tight end position, too. He's new to the mix, too. And then, obviously, Boyd, too. So there's a lot of different ways you can go here. But at least all around, I think there's a lot of good opportunities for these Bengals receivers. But definitely wanted to point out this one here for Boyd going up against Adarius Washington. Okay, final one we're going to touch on here. This is for the primetime game here. This is Saints and Panthers. I like Michael Thomas a lot here this week. I mentioned in that last segment there, he looked really strong on the field. This has really been the first time he's been fully healthy since the pandemic year in 2020. He's missed so much time in between there. But look at the numbers that he had last week. 7 targets last week, 5 catches for 61 yards, had an average distance of target of 11, and was one of those players that saw one of those targets that I mentioned of over 20 yards. So they're feeling comfortable going deep downfield with him once again, even with someone like Chris Olave back into the mix. But again, this is someone you easily forget was one of the premier wide receivers in the league over the years that he was healthy, dating back before that pandemic season in 2020. Every year that he's been on the field, regardless if he gets injured or not, he averages 10.7 yards per reception. Let's see the matchup that he's going to be in here today. Now, Dante Jackson was not only targeted against 1 time last week. Look at the numbers. This is from the entire year last year. 47 targets against him last year, a 76.6% reception rate, 9.5 yards per reception for the entire year last year for the Panthers. I mentioned I like what Derek Carr does with his offense, going downfield, goes to some of these guys with the checkdowns and the running backs. Overall, he makes his offense better, and I think Michael Thomas finally has someone competent that can throw to him, especially downfield. This matchup today against Dante Jackson, I think, is one of the best ones for the primetime slate. What do you think about this one for Thomas?
I'm with you, Steve. I'm going to go yardage, though, not catches here. 4.5 catches, it feels like that's an easy over, but it is -120 to the under. That scares me a little bit. But the receiving yards, 54.5. It's minus 115 both sides. He had 5 catches for 61 in the opener. Olave gets a lot of targets. I think that obviously leaves Thomas with a lot of playmaking opportunities here. Can he get you 55 yards? I think that's definitely doable against a pretty good matchup here against this corner. So give me the over 54.5 with Thomas to the over.
All right, so we hope that helped you make some decisions for your daily fantasy lineup, making some bets here this afternoon. We're going to probably do this weekly, so we'll check in with some of these cornerbacks as the weeks progress. We're going to wrap up the show next segment here. We're going to talk about what we learned from week 1, how we're going to apply that to week 2, and then the 3 of these amigos, we're going to give our locks, our best bets for this upcoming week 2 when the sweat returns. Welcome back to the final block of the Sweat. Steve Buchanan alongside Julian Edlow and Josh Applebaum. We're going to talk some lessons learned from week 1. I'm not talking about when you get in trouble and you get scolded by your mother and she says, what did you learn? We're going to talk about what we learned from the games we saw in week 1. Josh, kick us off here. What did you learn from week 1 that you'll apply to week 2?
Yeah, so I think it's something that maybe you learned before, or maybe this is your first time learning it, but paying attention to late movement and late steam. Now, steam is a word in the sports betting market you're probably going to hear a lot. Steam is basically a sudden change in line movement across the entire sports betting marketplace. It's when you see the entire market move in one direction. It can't just be one book, it's got to be all books. That's when a big overload of smart money comes in. A couple examples from week 1. We saw the Browns, Steve, get way steamed down. They came through for a lot of wise guys. Same thing with the Rams, the Bucks, the Packers were at Green Bay. Pretty much all that late steam cash except for the Steelers. So it's not going to win every time, but I think it's kind of a thing where if you didn't make a bet, you want to go with the late action. If you already made a bet, you love it when that late steam is going in your direction. So kind of the application of that lesson today would be a play that I love. I know I'm kind of, you guys might disagree a bit, but the Atlanta Falcons. I love this spot on the Falcons. You know, they open at 1 point, or at 1 point a dog. They flipped to a favorite. When we started this show, guys, they were -2, trending to 2.5. They just went to 3. So I think if you do like Green Bay, obviously you're getting the 3 now, which you love, but you got to take a step back and say, why are you getting the 3? Because late money continues to pour in here on Atlanta, who's only getting like 25% of bets. So late movement, late steam, it's so critical. I always love being on that side, and I'm actually loving the fact that Atlanta's getting steamed right now.
Julian, we've talked about Aaron Rodgers immensely throughout the show here, but you're taking a little bit of a different angle here when it comes to the Jets.
Yeah, I'm going to shift the spotlight to the other side of the ball. Aaron Rodgers has been the headline in sports all week, and then the fallout effect of going to Zach Wilson and what he's going to be able to do with this team. Maybe we're forgetting about how good the defense looked on Monday night against the Bills, holding them to 16 points, getting a stop against them in overtime. And the Jets, Garrett Wilson gets one of the catches of the week in the end zone and a punt return in overtime for their 2 touchdowns. This is going to be, the Jets are going to grind all season long without Aaron Rodgers. They're going to do it on the defensive side of the ball, and they're really going to grind clock with that 2-headed monster at running back and their inability to pass the ball because they don't have faith in Zach Wilson to stay away from making mistakes. So I think how you apply this to week 2 is the under. I don't care that it has crashed down, whatever it is, 8 points, really only a few since the Aaron Rodgers injury. This is still a good under to me, and particularly looking at, well, the Cowboys scored 40 on their own last week. That would go over this alone. Not against this defense, and a lot of that was the Cowboys getting turnovers and starting with basically no field to go, already in scoring position. So this is going to be 2 of the best defenses in the league. A lot more of a grinder, and the ability of the Jets defense, I think, puts them in a spot to bet unders almost every week.
And especially, too, what did Dak Prescott specifically point out that he wants to do less of? Turning the ball over, interceptions. Who better to generate those turnovers or interceptions than the Jets defense at this point? My week 1 lesson, I think what we saw from the Bears offensive play calling was kind of eye-opening. They ran the ball last week only 41% of the time. That is not a number you usually see from the Bears. That was over 50%, 55% for the year. Justin Fields did something that we don't normally see from him, throwing the ball consistently. 37 pass attempts from Justin Fields last week. Now going up against one of the better teams against the run last year in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If you look at the prop for the number of completions for Justin Fields for today, 15.5 at -105. If he's going to be throwing the ball almost 40 times in a game, I think he can easily go over that number of 15.5 completions, and you're getting a good price on it too as well. So I'm not saying that I like Justin Fields as a passer per se. I just think this number hasn't caught up from what we saw from that Bears offensive play calling last week, going up against a tough Buccaneers defensive line. I think this is a really good number, a strong number that you can get for Fields to go over on this game. Anybody, any thoughts on that number there? If that's maybe too low, priced correctly, what do you guys think?
Volume-wise on week 1, yeah, you're getting a good price, and obviously Kirk Cousins passed a lot on this defense in week 1, threw the ball a lot. So I have a lot of questions in terms of what the Bears are. They could look completely different this week, so that would be my only red flag is just I wouldn't take everything that we saw from the Bears in week 1 and say that's how it's going to look in week 2. But they're a dog again on the road. They should need to throw it.
All right, we're going to go into our favorite plays of the week. We may have already given this out during the show. We have a lot of bets that we give out here, but what is your favorite on this slate overall? Can be today, can be Sunday night, can be Monday. Josh, kick us off here. What do you got?
Yeah, so I mentioned this quite a bit here, but the Atlanta Falcons, to me, that's my play of the day. Just the fact that you opened here at one point, at least with the Falcons getting points, it flipped dog to fave. This is a dog to fave that Julian and I cashed on, that same system match in college football yesterday with West Virginia going dog to fave. So I love the fact this line's flipped to Atlanta. Atlanta, again, is only getting around 25% of bets, and the late movement, which is so critical, is moving in their direction, which you love to see. Injuries here on Green Bay as well, with their running back Jones, as well as one of their wide receivers. I'll give you one more, too, though, just to keep an eye on. I actually really like the Jacksonville Jaguars today. I know our buddy Emerson is somewhere in Vermont drinking IPAs and doing Vermont stuff right now. But if you get the 3.5 here, this is the one of the most lopsided plays of the day. We mentioned it earlier, Steve. We were talking about this game. You look at Mahomes. He doesn't cover too many spreads as a favorite, especially on the road. You can get the hook there with Jacksonville. Buy low here in this spot. If you look at KC, it's like, hey, they got to bounce back and play well. Yep. Two of their best players are back, but yet, why is this 3.5 coming down to 3? Tells me there's still some respect on the odds maker side for the Jags here. I'll take the Jags 3.5.
Do you have a comment on that, Julian?
I was just going to say, I don't know why we have to mention Emerson's Jags at the end of every show. He's not even
misses
here.
Us today. That's what I heard. Yeah.
He's sleeping.
Right.
You obviously have to go next with your best bet because we have a head-to-head.
Yeah, I like the Packers on the money line here. I mean, I've mentioned it a number of times. I loved how they looked last week. I thought they looked great, even with Jordan Love not being overly accurate in that game. But even without Aaron Jones, even without Christian Watson, I still think this team has enough to beat the Atlanta Falcons, because defensively, once again, the Falcons have nothing that you need to fear about. They're going to get pressure on Jordan Love? No. Are their cornerbacks going to stop, the lack of receivers that they still have? No, likely not, because right now, their best receiver that's taking the field here today might be Luke Musgrave, who I said had a really good game. The box score didn't show it, but he's getting the deep shots downfield. He's playing on all the snaps that he can play at this point. That was the guy that Jordan Love was going to, especially during the preseason as well. They've already kind of built that rapport. So I like the Packers here as underdogs. It's at plus 136 at this point. I just think that is going to be one of the better teams coming out of that division this year, and I think they can take down the Falcons in this one. You be a tiebreaker here. I know you were a little on the cusp earlier. You got to pick a side here.
Get off the fence. Where are you going? You going Steve? You going me?
This is not a bet
Packers
for you.
plus 3 and Falcons money line. Can that be my pick? All right. I would like to apologize in advance to the graphics guys. I don't really feel that bad for them because I got the line movement. I wanted to change my best bet. I was going to lay 3.5 with Denver, but Dallas is down to 8. It was sitting 9. I can't tease them to 3 because I don't want to push on 3 or lose on 3. It is now 8. So I can do the teaser I want. Yep. Dallas down to -2 against the Jets at home, and we get the Niners to -1.5 against the Rams. We're teasing the Niners and the Rams. I like the spots for these two teams. The Jets, I'm talking about the under. Obviously, that favors the dog, but I would be stunned if Zach Wilson goes into Dallas and actually gets a win over the Cowboys. So we're laying 2 there. Win it by a field goal, and you're fine. And then San Francisco, I think, is just a freight train. Everybody's liking what they saw from the Rams in Week 1. I think this is where it comes back to reality and what should be closer to a home game for the Niners.
It's a good number.
Sorry again, graphics.
No,
guys.
it's a good number.
I think Howard was doing them, so I don't feel that bad.
Howard doesn't do good graphics anyways. But
no,
I think
he
you're
probably messed it up to begin with.
I think that's obviously has to become one of the top teaser legs now. Now that it's down to 8, you can grab on that too. What other teaser legs do you like here? Because obviously we talk about this a lot on the Unreasonable Odds podcast.
Yeah.
There were a lot of good teaser pieces that you could use this week. We've talked about the 49ers. We've talked about the Cowboys here. I mean, are the Patriots a decent one here, getting up to 8.5 against the Dolphins?
Yeah, so the other favorite, I do think the Bills are gonna win at home. You can get them from 7.5 to 1.5. That's the other favorite that I would consider using. But just going through the rest of the board, some of the primetime dogs I really like a lot.
Yeah.
That would be the Patriots and the Steelers, teams that we kind of liked there. I think you go to the primetime, you get them up to 8.5. Those are pretty safe spots if you do want to look at some of the dogs.
Like I mentioned earlier, I do like the Steelers plus 8.5. Is there a teaser leg that we haven't mentioned, or even if we mentioned, that you do like today as well?
I'm right there with you, Steve, on that one. Patriots are a good opportunity. I just like any dog you can go 2.5 to 8.5.
Sure.
I mean, that's pretty much the best spot to go in. I'll just throw this one at you. I know it's not the perfect teaser. You're only going through really one key number. But the Indianapolis Colts, they're on the road at Houston. I'm seeing this line get down to a pick 'em. We started the show, this was Houston -1. So late money seems to be breaking with the Indianapolis Colts. You know, if you can get them +1 to +7, at least you go through the 3 and quasi the 6 there. I would expect this to be a tight game.
Yeah.
Maybe the Colts win, but if not, you know, tease them up a little bit, give yourself a little more security.
All right, that is going to conclude this Week 2 edition of The Sweat. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll be here every Saturday and Sunday. Don't forget, tomorrow, Gojo and Golic will be here on the DraftKings Network starting at 8 a.m. Eastern. Thanks again for tuning in. For Steve Buchanan, Julian Edlow, Josh Applebaum, see you next week.